Stepping out of the cab, I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of freshly cut grass and blooming magnolias filling my lungs. The quaint streets of my hometown hadn't changed a bit, but I wasn't the same wide-eyed girl who had left a decade ago, full of dreams and ambition. My heart sank as I approached Aunt Margot's porch. This was supposed to be a temporary refuge, but the words I overheard through the screen door shattered any illusion of a warm welcome. "Can't believe she had the nerve to show up here after everything." Margot's shrill voice carried like nails on a chalkboard. Her mother would be so disappointed. "Don't worry, Mom," Beckett chimed in, his tone laced with poorly concealed glee. "We'll make sure she doesn't overstay her welcome." The screen door creaked open, and Margot's beady eyes locked onto mine. A sickly, sweet smile stretched across her wrinkled face, but the look she gave me could curdle milk. Well, if it isn't the prodigal niece returning. I mustered a polite nod, swallowing the bitter retort on my tongue. "Aunt Margot, thank you for having me." "Don't thank me yet, dear," she sneered, ushering me inside with a bony hand. "You'll be earning your keep around here." Beckett emerged from the living room, his condescending smirk doing little to mask the jealousy that flickered in his eyes whenever he looked at me. "Hey, cuz, long time no see." He pulled me into an unwanted hug, his grip lingering a little too long. "Welcome home." As I followed them into the house that had once been a sanctuary, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a viper's nest. The game had begun, and I was the unwitting pawn in whatever twisted power play Margot and Beckett had concocted. Over the next few days, the tension was palpable. Margot treated me like an inconvenient house guest, piling on chores and deliberately excluding me from family discussions. Beckett, on the other hand, took every opportunity to mock my recent struggles, reveling in my misfortunes with a twisted sense of schadenfreude. "Heard you got canned from that fancy job of yours," he sneered one morning over coffee. "Guess the big city wasn't ready for your talents." I clenched my jaw, determined not to take the bait. It wasn't a good fit. I'm just grateful to have a chance to regroup here. Beckett let out a scornful laugh. "Yeah, good luck with that. This town has a long memory, and you're the black sheep of the family now." His words stung, but I refused to show it. I had come too far to let their petty mind games break me. This was my home, my family, and I wasn't about to let them take that away from me without a fight. As I lay awake that night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still clinging to my childhood ceiling, I made a silent vow. No matter what games Margot and Beckett were playing, I would unravel their twisted web of lies and deceit. The road ahead might be treacherous, but I was done running. It was time to face the storm head-on and reclaim what was rightfully mine. A week had passed since my unwelcome homecoming, and Margot's disdain showed no signs of waning. Every morning, she would greet me with a fresh list of chores, her lips curled into a sneer as she inspected my work with a critical eye. "Honestly, Raina, is this the best you can do?" she sneered one afternoon, pointing at a smudge on the kitchen counter. "No wonder you can't hold down a job." Before I could respond, Beckett sauntered in, that infuriating smirk plastered across his face. "Give the girl a break, Mom. She's just not cut out for real work." My fists clenched at my sides, but I bit my tongue. Losing my cool was exactly what they wanted. Later that week, I finally secured a job at the local boutique, desperate for any excuse to get out of that suffocating house. But even that small victory was short-lived. Well, if it isn't the failed city girl," Beckett sneered when I shared the news. "Bet you'll be real popular working retail with all your fancy degrees." Margot clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Just don't go getting any ideas, dear. This is a temporary arrangement until you get back on your feet." The implied message was clear. I was nothing more than a charity case in their eyes, a burden to be tolerated until I could be sent on my way. At work, whispers seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Former friends and classmates watched me with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude, no doubt regaling each other with tales of my spectacular downfall. "Hey, Raina, heard you lost your big-shot job in the city," one of my old high school friends, Kendra, said with a saccharine smile. "That's too bad. I always knew you'd end up right back where you started." I forced a polite smile, my cheeks burning with humiliation. "Just taking a little break, that's all." Sometimes you need to recharge your batteries. Kendra's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Well, good luck with that. This town has a way of trapping people, you know? As the days wore on, the isolation wore me down. Everywhere I turned, I was met with snide remarks or cold shoulders. Even mundane trips to the grocery store became exercises in avoiding judgmental stares and whispered barbs. It didn't take long to realize that Beckett was behind it all, spinning a twisted web of lies and rumors to alienate me from what few allies I had left in this town. My sordid, big-city misadventures became fodder for the local gossip mill, each story more outlandish than the last. It was clear that Margot and Beckett saw me as an intruder, a threat to be neutralized before I could regain my footing. And as the walls closed in around me, I knew I had two choices: wither away in their poisonous shadow, or fight back with everything I had. One sleepless night, as I stared at the shadows dancing across my childhood bedroom walls, the path forward became clear. If Margot and Beckett wanted a war, they would get one. It was time to stop playing by their rules and expose their twisted charade for what it truly was. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would show no mercy. "You're selling Grandma's land?" I fought to keep my voice steady, my fingers digging into the worn wood. The property she wanted preserved as a community park? Margot's expression was one of cold indifference. "It's a prime piece of real estate, and we could use the money, unless you'd like to start contributing to this household?" My mouth opened, then closed as 1,000 retorts battled on my tongue. Before I could formulate a response, Beckett swaggered into the room, cutting me off with a condescending laugh. "Why so shocked, cuz? Did you really think that scrap of land was yours?" His eyes glinted with malice. "Face it, you're just a guest here. A guest with no real stake in this family's legacy." White-hot anger flooded my veins as his implication hit home. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a rat scurrying through the walls of their home, to be exterminated or starved out at their whim. "How dare you?" I seethed, rising from my chair. "That land belongs to me as much as—" "Enough!" Margot's voice cracked like a whip, freezing me in place. "I've indulged your delusions long enough, Raina. This is my house, my rules." Her cold stare bored into me, daring me to challenge her authority. For a fleeting moment, I saw the twisted game she was playing, a cruel power trip designed to strip me of any semblance of dignity or autonomy. "I'm giving you a choice," she continued, her tone edged with venom. "You can accept your place as a subordinate under my roof, or you can take your chances out there." A gnarled finger jutted towards the door, the implication clear. Beckett leaned back against the counter, a smug grin plastered on his face as he savored my humiliation. Without uttering a word, he had made his allegiance known. Turn against me or face the consequences. A kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within me: rage, humiliation, desperation. This was supposed to be a sanctuary, a temporary respite where I could regroup and find my footing. Now the walls seemed to be closing in, leaving me cornered by those I should have been able to trust above all others. I opened my mouth, fully prepared to unleash the torrent of pent-up anger and resentment that threatened to consume me from within. But something made me pause, the ember of a newfound determination flickering to life. "Fine," I managed through gritted teeth, reining in my explosive emotions. "You want to play hardball? Game on." Without another word, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the kitchen, my mind already racing with the beginnings of a counterattack. If Margot and Beckett thought they could bully me into submission, they were sorely mistaken. I refused to be the victim any longer. From that moment on, the battle lines were drawn in earnest. I became a silent observer, committing every underhanded comment and manipulative tactic to memory. Slowly but surely, I began assembling the pieces of the puzzle, the true depths of their depravity taking shape. They wanted to strip me of my family legacy? Fine. I would rebuild an empire from the ashes, one that would make the name Mercer something to be feared and respected once again. And when the dust finally settled, there would be a reckoning. That twisted game of theirs was just getting started. In the weeks following Margot's ultimatum, an uneasy truce settled over the household. Beckett continued his petty needling, making snide comments whenever our paths crossed, but I met his barbs with stony silence, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "What's the matter, cuz?" he sneered one morning as I grabbed my keys. "City life finally catch up with you?" I brushed past him without a word, his taunts falling on deaf ears. I had bigger fish to fry. My days soon settled into a methodical routine, work at the boutique, followed by clandestine meetings and information gathering. Slowly but surely, I began piecing together the true scope of Beckett's misdeeds in this town. First, there were the underhanded business deals, greasing palms to secure municipal contracts that should have gone to more reputable firms. Then came the whispers of more insidious acts, bribery, extortion, even allegations of fraud. Beckett's been running this town's underbelly for years. An old friend from high school confided over drinks one night. Anybody who gets in his way tends to have some bad luck. My blood ran cold at the implication, but I pressed on, making careful note of every scrap of intel. If I was going to bring these snakes down, I needed an airtight case. As my web of contacts grew, so too did the risks. I soon found myself navigating a minefield of shifting loyalties and interests, never quite sure who could be trusted. "Be careful who you talk to, Raina," Kendra, my coworker, warned after I broached the subject of Beckett's activities. "This town has eyes and ears everywhere. You don't want to end up on the wrong side." Her words struck a nerve, forcing me to confront the harsh reality that I was waging this war on enemy territory. One misstep could unravel everything I'd worked so hard for. But I was committed to seeing this through, no matter the cost. Gradually, the exhaustion of maintaining a double life began to weigh on me. There were nights where I would lie awake, replaying every potentially incriminating interaction in my mind, second-guessing my every move. I knew Beckett was watching, waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. And Margot, while keeping her distance, radiated a palpable sense of smug superiority that grated on my nerves. It all came to a head one fateful evening over a stilted family dinner. As I picked at the overcooked meatloaf before me, Beckett broke the tense silence with a barrage of snide remarks. "You've been awfully scarce lately, Raina," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Not getting into any trouble out there, are you?" Margot pursed her lips, but said nothing, her gaze boring into me with a silent dare to challenge her son's authority. That was the final straw. In a split-second decision, I reached into my purse and retrieved the meticulous file I had compiled, detailed records of Beckett's shady dealings, eyewitness accounts, even grainy photos of him exchanging illicit packages. "You want to know what kind of trouble I've been getting into?" I growled, slamming the dossier onto the table with a resounding thud. "Take a look for yourself." Beckett's cocky smirk faltered as he flipped through the damning evidence. For the first time since my return, I held all the power. "What is this?" Margot hissed, her bony fingers wrapping around the file like talons. My gaze was steely as I leaned back, letting the weight of her son's transgressions sink in. "Your perfect little prince has been running this town into the ground," I said, relishing the words, but not for much longer. The game was on, and this time I held all the cards. The annual Mercer family gathering was always a tense affair, but this year's event carried an electric undercurrent of anticipation. As I stepped into the backyard, dozens of judgmental eyes fell upon me. Aunts, uncles, and cousins all whispering behind cupped hands. Beckett wasted no time in making his presence known, swaggering over with a wolfish grin. Well, if it isn't the black sheep herself, gracing us with her presence. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Don't worry, cousin. I'll be on my best behavior." Before he could respond, Margot's shrill voice cut through the din like a rusted knife. "Everyone, please take your seats. We have much to discuss." As the family assembled around the weathered picnic tables, Beckett made a show of pulling out his mother's chair, reveling in the approving murmurs that rippled through the crowd. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. The performance was just another ploy to solidify his position at Margot's side. "Now, as you all know, our annual gathering isn't just about reminiscing," Margot began, her steely gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. "It's also a time to discuss the future of our family's legacy." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Beckett's smug smile, the unspoken message clear. He expected to be named the heir apparent, the keeper of the Mercer family flame. This was my moment. "Before we proceed," I interjected, rising from my seat, "there's something you all should know about our esteemed cousin Beckett." A hush fell over the crowd as I produced the incriminating dossier, letting it fall upon the table with a dull thud. It would seem our family's legacy isn't quite as pristine as we've been led to believe. Beckett's eyes widened in panic as I laid bare the sordid details: shady business deals, extortion, even implications of more violent criminal ties. A cacophony of gasps and muttered disbelief echoed through the backyard as I exposed every last dirty secret. "You lying bye." Beckett lunged towards me, only to be restrained by two burly uncles. Margot remained motionless, her face drained of color as the stark reality of her son's transgressions sank in. In the ensuing chaos, I locked eyes with my aunt, allowing the faintest hint of a smile to crease my lips. "You wanted the truth, Margot? Well, here it is in all its sordid glory." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing, powerless in the face of such overwhelming evidence. As the family erupted in heated argument, I stepped back, reveling in the implosion of their carefully curated facade. The reckoning had begun. In the aftermath of the family gathering, the fractures that had been laid bare only deepened. Beckett's web of criminal dealings unraveled at a dizzying pace as the local authorities pounced, emboldened by the evidence I had provided. Within days, he found himself under investigation, his assets frozen and a cloud of suspicion hanging over every business venture he had touched. The once smug prince had become a pariah, his name reviled from every corner of the town he had exploited. And Margot? Her fall from grace was just as precipitous. As the matriarch who had turned a blind eye to her son's misdeeds, she became a social outcast, shunned by the very people who had once fawned over her every move. It was almost impressive how quickly the tide had turned. One moment, they were the revered pillars of our community. The next, they were untouchables, radioactive figures to be avoided at all costs. I, meanwhile, found myself thrust into an unlikely position of power. With Beckett's criminal empire in shambles, someone had to step in and salvage what remained of our family's legitimate business interests. And in the eyes of many, I was the only Mercer untainted by scandal. It wasn't a mantle I accepted lightly. Part of me still harbored doubts, wondering if I was truly cut out to lead in the wake of such turmoil. But as I surveyed the wreckage left behind by Beckett's greed, I knew I had no choice but to try. My first order of business was damage control, auditing every deal, every partnership, and severing ties with anyone even remotely connected to Beckett's illegal activities. It was a grueling process, made all the more difficult by the lingering stench of mistrust that permeated every interaction. "How can we be sure you're not just another snake in the grass?" one skeptical investor accused during a tense meeting. "You Mercers have a talent for betrayal, it seems." I bit back the angry retort that danced on my tongue, forcing myself to remain composed. "I'm well aware of the challenges ahead, but I'm committed to righting the wrongs of the past. This family's legacy deserves better." It was a hard-fought battle, but slowly, brick by brick, I began rebuilding our reputation from the ashes. Shady deals were terminated, criminal associates were cut loose, and a new culture of transparency took root. All the while, Margot remained conspicuously absent, holed up in her dilapidated home like a wounded animal. Part of me wondered if she would ever emerge, or if the humiliation of her son's downfall had finally broken her indomitable spirit. That question was answered one dreary afternoon when I returned home from the office to find her skeletal figure hunched on my doorstep, eyes downcast. I don't know what to say," she murmured as I approached, her voice a ragged whisper of its former authoritative tone. Part of me wanted to revel in her suffering, to exact the ultimate revenge for all the pain and anguish she had inflicted. But as I studied her shrunken form, something cold and hard twisted in my gut. Pity. With a resigned sigh, I unlocked the door, holding it open in silent invitation. Margot looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of shame and relief. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. With Beckett disgraced and facing potential criminal charges, I turned my attention to the next battle, securing my rightful inheritance. Grandma's cherished plot of land, the one Margot had so casually tried to sell off, would be the first step in restoring the Mercer family legacy. But negotiating with my aunt in the wake of her son's downfall proved to be a delicate dance. "I don't know what you want from me," Margot muttered, slumped in the chair across from my desk like a broken marionette. "You've taken everything else." I fought back the urge to roll my eyes at her melodramatics. Don't play the victim, Margot. This is about making things right. Her gaze hardened, a flicker of her old defiance shining through. By taking that land, ripping away the last scrap of dignity I have left? It was never yours to sell in the first place, I countered, sliding a sheaf of documents across the desk. Grandma's will clearly states that the property belongs to me upon her passing. Margot's bony fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, the damning legal language staring back at her. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt a pang of pity for the broken woman before me. Almost. You can't do this, she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. That land is all I have left. I leaned back, fixing her with a level stare. Actually, you have a choice. The property becomes a community park as Grandma intended, under my stewardship, or you fight me on this and lose everything. Her shoulders slumped in defeat as the weight of her circumstances finally sank in. Any legal challenge she mounted would be quashed, her reputation too tarnished to gain any traction. Margot was well and truly boxed into a corner of my making. Fine, she growled through gritted teeth. Take your damn park, but don't think for 1 second that I'll ever forgive you for this. A thin smile played across my lips as I slid the contract across the desk, reveling in her impotent fury. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Margot, just your compliance. As her gnarled hand trembled over the dotted line, I allowed myself a moment of vindication. The first chess piece had fallen into place. Over the next few months, I steadily consolidated my hold over the family's interests. One by one, the remaining assets trickled under my control as Margot's influence withered and died. Even Beckett's last flailing attempts to cling to power were rendered moot as the legal walls closed in around him. By the end of that turbulent first year, I stood at the apex, overseeing the resurrection of the Mercer Empire from the ashes of deceit and betrayal. It was an empire built on transparency, integrity, everything those snakes had once lacked. The true test, however, came with the groundbreaking ceremony for Grandma's community park. As I stood before the assembled crowd, I couldn't help but bask in the moment, relishing the look of barely contained fury etched onto Margot's face. This was my legacy, my crowning achievement, and she could do nothing but watch as the culmination of her failures played out before her. Today marks a new dawn for our town, I proclaimed, my voice carrying over the hushed gathering. A green space where families can come together, unburdened by the sins of the past. I paused, letting my gaze settle on Margot with a pointed stare. Those driven by greed and malice would seek to spoil this gift, to defile its sacred purpose. But their pernicious influence has been purged, allowing this spirit of community to take root and thrive. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and I could see the anger simmering behind Margot's eyes. This was the ultimate humiliation, and we both knew it. As the ceremonial first shovel broke ground, I felt an immense sense of catharsis wash over me. The turnaround, so many years in the making, was finally complete. Beckett's star had fallen, Margot's reign of toxicity had ended, and in their place a new order was born, one built on the ideals Grandma had embodied, the true heart of our family's legacy. It was everything they had once sought to deny me. And I had seized it through resilience, determination, and a heaping dose of hard-earned karma. In the months that followed the opening of Grandma's park, Oakville settled into an era of rebirth and renewal. The open space quickly became a beloved gathering place, a verdant oasis in the heart of our humble town. I lost track of how many times parents approached me, eyes shining with gratitude as their kids frolicked on the playground equipment or kicked a ball across the lush greenery. "Thank you for doing this," they would murmur, their words carrying a depth of emotion that no business success could ever match. Our community deserves this. As for Margot, our relationship remained frosty at best. She avoided public outings, electing to shroud herself in self-imposed exile rather than face the prying eyes of those who had witnessed her spectacular fall. Part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of remorse at how events had unfolded. For all her faults, she was still family, still the woman who had once been a second mother to me during those halcyon childhood summers. But the scars ran too deep, the specter of betrayal casting a pall over any hint of reconciliation. We crossed paths only when strictly necessary, the occasional terse meeting to discuss residual family matters or legal obligations. Our barbed exchanges were a twisted dance, each of us probing for weaknesses and finding none. At least that's how it was, until the day she showed up unannounced on my front step. "We need to talk," Margot murmured, her eyes downcast as she invited herself into my living room. I tensed, readying myself for whatever fresh salvo of resentment she planned to unleash. But the venom never came. Instead, she regarded me with a look that could almost be mistaken for wistfulness, her usual imperiousness conspicuously absent. "I did some thinking while I was away," she began, worrying her hands in her lap, "about the path that led us here, the choices I made that put my priorities in the wrong place." I said nothing, but my eyebrow arched ever so slightly, coaxing her to continue. "What I'm trying to say is—" She faltered, visibly struggling to force the words out. "I was wrong, Raina, about everything." The admission hung in the air, so unexpected and uncharacteristic that I found myself temporarily stunned into silence. This was the indomitable Margot Mercer, a proud, vindictive woman, admitting fault, apologizing. "I don't expect your forgiveness," she pressed on, her voice strained. "I know I squandered any chance at that a long time ago, but I owe you this reckoning, I suppose." I opened my mouth, then closed it, feeling uncharacteristically unmoored by her contrition. The bitterness still lingered, as potent as ever, but after so many years of hostility and rancor, this olive branch, however belated, represented a chance to finally exorcise the demons of our shared history. "Thank you," I said at last, the words tasting unfamiliar on my tongue when directed at her, "for acknowledging that, at least." Margot nodded, her eyes glistening with something resembling remorse. We both knew that this wasn't forgiveness, nor even the start of rebuilding what had been shattered beyond repair. But it was a start, however small and fragile. A chance to shed the burdens of the past and move forward, unburdened by the recriminations and deceits that had poisoned our family tree for far too long. As she stood to leave, I found myself struck by how diminished she seemed. A husk of the imperious, cunning woman whose shadow had loomed over my life for so many years. In her place was someone human. Flawed, yes, but finally awakened to the consequences of her own sins. Perhaps that realization, however belated, could serve as the foundation for a new era in the Mercer family legacy. One where integrity and accountability took precedence over ambition and greed. Or perhaps it was merely the first step in a long, arduous road towards personal redemption for us both. Only time would tell. But as I watched Margot's withered form disappear into the fading summer dusk, I felt an unshakable sense of purpose settle over me like a warm embrace. The storm had passed, the monsters had been vanquished, and in their wake the path towards healing, for me, for this town, for the rightful legacy we all deserved, could finally begin.